The soft ping of the altitude warning echoed through the cabin as Flight 447 climbed steadily above the Atlantic. Sophia Collins tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and continued her methodical check of the emergency medical supplies. 29 years old with 8 years of nursing experience, she was compact and precise. Barely 5 inches with intricate braids she twisted into a tight bun each morning for her shifts. The thick-rimmed glasses perched on her nose made her hazel eyes look larger, more observant as she mentally cataloged every medication, device, and protocol that might be needed during the 11-hour transatlantic journey. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The other flight attendants called her the ghost behind her back. She moved through the aircraft cabin like a shadow, appearing wherever someone needed assistance, then disappearing back into the galley without seeking recognition. During pre-flight briefings, Sophia rarely spoke, just nodded attentively. She never joined crew conversations about weekend plans or passenger gossip, simply smiled politely and returned to her duties. "Collins, there's a passenger in 14C complaining of chest pain." Head flight attendant Javier Morales called over. "Can you check it out?" Sophia nodded and grabbed the medical kit. This was why Transoceanic Airlines had started adding registered nurses to their long-haul flight crews 3 years ago, to handle the increasing number of medical emergencies at 38,000 feet. While other airlines relied on chance presence of medical professionals among passengers, Transoceanic had pioneered having dedicated medical staff on board. The passenger in 14C was a middle-aged businessman sweating profusely despite the cabin's cool temperature. Sophia knelt beside him, her movements calm and deliberate as she introduced herself. "Sir, I'm Sophia, the flight nurse. I understand you're experiencing some discomfort. Can you describe what you're feeling right now?" Her voice was quiet but clear, carrying a natural authority that instantly put patients at ease. As she checked his vitals and asked targeted questions, the businessman's anxiety visibly decreased. Just a panic attack, frightening but not life-threatening. 20 minutes later, she had him breathing normally and sipping water. "Thank you," he whispered. "I thought I was having a heart attack." Sophia smiled. "It's a common misperception. The symptoms can feel remarkably similar. Your vitals are stable now, but I'll check on you again in an hour." Javier watched from the galley as she documented the incident in her medical log. "You know, you could have radioed for assistance. You don't have to handle everything alone." Sophia shrugged. "It wasn't necessary. The situation was well within my capabilities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Her colleagues respected her skills but found her difficult to know. In 3 years of flying together, none had been invited to her apartment or learned much about her past beyond the basics. Boston raised, Johns Hopkins educated, former emergency room nurse who'd burned out after 5 years of trauma care. What they didn't know was that Sophia had developed a strange daily ritual that puzzled the few who noticed. Every flight, without fail, she spent precisely 12 minutes in the cockpit during her break, observing the pilot's procedures and asking careful questions about the aircraft systems. Most crew members assumed she was simply making conversation or had a casual interest in aviation. The truth was far more complex. Captain Eduardo Reyes had initially been annoyed by her presence, but gradually grew to appreciate her quiet curiosity. "You ask better questions than some of our trainees," he told her one day over the Atlantic. "Ever consider switching careers?" Sophia shook her head. "I'm comfortable with medical emergencies, but I believe in understanding the entire system I'm working within." The truth, which she kept carefully hidden, was that Sophia's father had been a commercial airline pilot who died in a crash when she was 12. The official investigation blamed pilot error, but her father had spent years documenting safety concerns that were ignored. Since joining Transoceanic, Sophia had been quietly collecting her own observations, continuing her father's legacy without anyone realizing it. That evening, as passengers settled in for the overnight flight from New York to Paris, Sophia completed her regular cabin check. The routine was comforting, examining oxygen masks, counting medical supplies, verifying that every safety system was operational. Her colleagues saw dedication. She saw necessary vigilance. In her small apartment in Queens, Sophia kept a photograph of her father standing proudly beside his aircraft. On the back, in faded ink, "For my little bird who will someday understand that safety isn't automatic. It's built by those who care enough to look twice." She carried his words with her on every flight, incorporated them into every safety check. 4 hours into the flight, most passengers were sleeping. Sophia was in the rear galley reviewing medical charts when First Officer Daniels approached. "Captain Reyes asked if you'd mind coming up front when you have a moment. He has some questions about that new medical protocol for in-flight emergencies." Sophia nodded and followed him through the darkened cabin toward the cockpit. As they approached, a sudden violent shudder ran through the aircraft. The plane lurched sharply right, then dropped several hundred feet in seconds. Oxygen masks deployed, and warning alarms blared throughout the cabin. Daniel sprinted the last few steps to the cockpit, Sophia close behind. What they found inside would change everything. Captain Reyes was slumped over the controls, unresponsive. Co-pilot Jimenez was struggling to maintain control with one hand while frantically checking the captain with the other. He collapsed mid-sentence. "I can't wake him." Jimenez's voice cracked with panic. Sophia's medical training kicked in instantly. She quickly assessed Reyes, unconscious but breathing, pupils unequal, pulse irregular. "Possible stroke," she announced, already moving to help transfer him out of the seat. The plane shuddered again, dropping another few hundred feet. Jimenez swore as he fought the controls. "Something's wrong with the hydraulic system, too. I can't get full response from the elevators." As they carefully moved Reyes to the floor, Jimenez gave a sudden gasp and clutched his chest, his face contorted in pain. Within seconds, he too collapsed. Sophia found herself alone in the cockpit of a damaged aircraft at 38,000 feet over the Atlantic, with 2 unconscious pilots and 237 lives depending on what she did next. Years of emergency room training had taught her to compartmentalize. First priority, assess immediate threats to life. She quickly checked both pilots, alive but completely incapacitated. Reyes likely had a stroke. Jimenez showed classic signs of a massive heart attack. Second priority, stabilize the immediate crisis. The aircraft was still flying but descending slowly, warning systems blaring. Sophia slid into the captain's seat, her hands hovering over unfamiliar controls. Her mind raced through countless hours of cockpit observation and the aviation books she'd studied in private. She grabbed the radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Transoceanic Flight 447. Both pilots are incapacitated due to medical emergencies. I am Flight Nurse Sophia Collins. I need immediate guidance." The response was immediate. "Flight 447, this is Atlantic Control. We copy your mayday. Are you able to maintain level flight?" "Negative. Aircraft is descending slowly. Multiple warning systems active. Hydraulic system appears compromised." There was a brief pause. "Flight 447, what is your aviation experience?" "None official. I've observed cockpit operations extensively and studied aircraft systems privately." Another pause. "Understand. We're contacting Transoceanic for remote assistance and diverting you to Keflavik, Iceland. It's the nearest suitable airport. We need you to stabilize the aircraft while we talk you through emergency procedures." Sophia took a deep breath. Copy that. Standing by for instructions. The next 20 minutes were a crash course in aviation emergency procedures. Flight controllers talked her through basic flight controls while transoceanic technical specialists were called in to provide aircraft-specific guidance. Small, gentle movements on the control column, instructed the voice of a transoceanic senior pilot patched in from New York. Don't overcorrect. You're doing fine, Sophia. She forced herself to focus solely on the instructions, filtering out the alarms, the unconscious pilots on the floor behind her, and the responsibility for hundreds of lives. Just another emergency protocol, she told herself. Break it down into manageable steps. Javier appeared at the cockpit door, his face pale with shock as he took in the scene. What happened? What can I do? Both pilots have serious medical emergencies, Sophia explained, her voice calm despite the chaos. I need you to move them carefully to the first-class cabin. Use the medical kits to stabilize them as best you can. Then return here immediately. As Javier organized crew members to move the pilots, Sophia continued working with the remote team to stabilize the aircraft. The hydraulic issue made the controls sluggish, requiring constant adjustments to maintain altitude. Flight 447, we're tracking you on radar, Atlantic Control advised. Your course looks good, but we need you to start a very gradual descent within the next 30 minutes. Keflavik is preparing for an emergency landing. The reality of what that meant hit her suddenly. She wasn't just stabilizing the plane. She would need to land it. Land a commercial airliner with compromised systems and no training. Javier returned with news that further complicated the situation. The pilots are stabilized for now, but we have multiple passenger medical emergencies, chest pains, difficulty breathing. People are panicking. Sophia nodded, making a quick decision. I need you here as co-pilot. Get Lisa to coordinate medical response using the emergency protocols I've trained your team on. Me? I don't know anything about flying. Neither did I 20 minutes ago. She met his eyes steadily. But you can follow instructions, and I need someone in that seat. We have 3 hours to learn enough to get this aircraft on the ground. The next hour passed in a blur of technical instructions, practice procedures, and growing confidence as Sophia found that her years of observing flight operations gave her an unexpected foundation to build upon. The damaged hydraulic system made the aircraft handling unpredictable, requiring constant adjustments, but she was adapting. You have excellent instincts, commented the transoceanic senior pilot guiding her. How did you learn to respond to aircraft feedback so quickly? I'm treating it like a patient, Sophia replied, making another small adjustment as the plane shuddered. Reading its vital signs, responding to symptoms, anticipating needs. The principles aren't that different. The technical team on the ground had been searching for any explanation for both pilots, becoming incapacitated simultaneously, an exceedingly rare occurrence. The answer came from an environmental systems specialist. Flight 447, we've reviewed your aircraft's maintenance records. There was a repair to the environmental control system 3 days ago. We believe there may be a carbon monoxide leak in the cockpit area only. The separate cabin air system appears unaffected. This explained the mysterious dual incapacitation and added urgency to their situation. Even with the cockpit door open now, toxic gas could still be present. Should we be wearing oxygen masks? Sophia asked. Affirmative. Both of you put on crew oxygen immediately. With masks on and the immediate crisis stabilized, Sophia had a moment to think beyond survival. Javier, I need you to prepare the cabin and crew for emergency landing. We'll be on the ground in just under 2 hours. As Javier briefed the crew via intercom, Sophia received landing instructions. The damaged hydraulics would make normal landing procedures impossible. They would need to attempt a modified approach with reduced flap settings and higher than normal landing speed. I won't lie to you, Sophia. said the senior pilot from New York. "This will be challenging even for experienced pilots. But you're showing remarkable aptitude, and we'll talk you through every step." Sophia thought of her father, of the countless hours she'd spent studying aircraft systems after his death, driven by a need to understand what had taken him from her. "I can do this," she said with quiet certainty. "Just keep talking me through it." 2 hours later, Flight 447 approached the coast of Iceland. Dawn was breaking over the volcanic landscape, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Sophia had successfully navigated the aircraft across hundreds of miles of open ocean, compensating for the damaged hydraulics that made every adjustment a battle of wills between human and machine. "Keflavik Tower, this is Flight 447 on emergency approach," she reported, her voice steady despite exhaustion. "Request confirmation of emergency services standing by." "Flight 447, Keflavik Tower. Emergency services are in position. Runway 11 is clear for your approach. Winds 220 at 15 knots. You are cleared to land." The senior pilot's voice came through her headset. "Sophia, remember what we practiced. Slightly higher approach speed to compensate for the reduced flaps. Keep the nose up longer than seems natural. You've got this." As the aircraft descended through 10,000 feet, Sophia could see the runway in the distance, a thin black line against the Icelandic terrain. She focused on the instruments, making constant small corrections to keep the damaged aircraft aligned with the runway. 5,000 feet, Javier called out, reading the altimeter. "Systems stable." Sophia felt a strange calm settle over her. All the years of studying aviation after her father's death, all the hours of observation in cockpits around the world, all the emergency medical training that had taught her to function under extreme pressure, everything in her life had prepared her for this moment. 1,000 feet, Javier announced. "Approach looks good. Flight 447, maintain current approach," Keflavik Tower confirmed. "You're well aligned with runway centerline." The ground rose up to meet them. Sophia pulled back slightly on the control column, keeping the nose elevated just as she'd been instructed. The aircraft floated over the runway threshold, speed still higher than normal for landing. "Now, Sophia," came the voice in her ear. Gentle touchdown, main wheels first. With a surprisingly soft bump, the main landing gear made contact with the runway. Sophia held the nose wheel off the ground for several seconds, bleeding off speed, before allowing it to settle. As soon as all wheels were on the ground, she applied the thrust reversers and brakes, bringing the massive aircraft to a controlled stop near the midpoint of the runway. For a moment, there was complete silence in the cockpit. Then the radio crackled to life. "Flight 447, Keflavik Tower. Excellent landing. Emergency services approaching your position now. Welcome to Iceland." Javier turned to her, his eyes wide with disbelief and admiration. "You just landed a commercial airliner with no training and damaged systems. That's impossible." Sophia released her white-knuckle grip on the controls, her hands shaking with delayed adrenaline. "Not impossible. Just improbable." She took a deep breath. "Let's get our patients to proper medical care." As emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft and medical teams rushed aboard to attend to the pilots, Sophia completed the shutdown procedure she'd been talked through. Only when everything was secure did she allow herself to feel the magnitude of what had just occurred. She had saved 237 lives by doing what everyone said was impossible. As she stepped out of the cockpit, the cabin erupted in applause. Passengers and crew members reached out to touch her, to thank her, their faces awash with gratitude and disbelief. But Sophia wasn't thinking about recognition or praise. She was thinking about her father, about the legacy of vigilance he'd instilled in her, about how his tragedy had ultimately prepared her to prevent another. Sometimes the quiet ones, the watchful ones, the ones who prepare without recognition, are carrying the ability to save lives when disaster strikes. As she walked down the aisle toward the exit, a flight attendant handed her a satellite phone. "Transoceanic CEO wants to speak with you personally." Sophia took the phone, already knowing that her life had changed forever. The nurse who had been invisible for so long had just become impossible to overlook. But more importantly, she had honored her father's memory in the most meaningful way possible, by turning tragedy into triumph, by turning observation into action when it mattered most. "This is Sophia Collins," she said into the phone, her voice steady and clear. The Intermed-Air Hospital in Keflavik buzzed with activity. Doctors and nurses moved with purpose through corridors as the morning sun streamed through windows, casting long shadows across polished floors. In the private waiting room reserved for Flight 447's crew, Sophia sat alone, her eyes fixed on the steaming cup of coffee between her hands that had long since gone cold. The events of the past 12 hours played through her mind like a film on repeat. The sudden emergency, the unconscious pilots, the damaged aircraft systems, and finally, the landing that everyone was now calling miraculous. She hadn't slept since before the flight departed New York yesterday evening. Exhaustion pulled at her edges, but adrenaline kept her alert, waiting for news about Captain Reyes and First Officer Jimenez. The door opened, and Dr. Olafsdotter entered, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Collins, I have updates on your colleagues." Sophia stood immediately, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. "How are they?" "Captain Reyes suffered an ischemic stroke. We've administered tissue plasminogen activator in time, which is promising. He's stable but will require extensive rehabilitation." The doctor's expression softened slightly. "First Officer Jimenez experienced a severe myocardial infarction, a heart attack. He's in critical but stable condition. The next 48 hours will be crucial, but he's young and otherwise healthy, which works in his favor." Sophia nodded, processing the information with clinical detachment, a skill honed through years in emergency medicine. "And the toxicology reports?" "Preliminary results confirm carbon monoxide poisoning in both men. The levels weren't lethal but were sufficient to cause unconsciousness, especially given their existing medical conditions." Dr. Olafsdotter consulted her notes. "Captain Reyes apparently had undiagnosed hypertension, which increased his stroke risk. Officer Jimenez had a congenital heart condition he was unaware of, the type that often remains asymptomatic until a major event occurs. A perfect storm of medical vulnerabilities combined with an environmental hazard. Exactly the kind of systemic failure that had fascinated and terrified Sophia since her father's death." "Thank you, doctor. May I see them?" "Briefly. They both need rest, but a familiar face might help their recovery." Sophia followed Dr. Olafsdotter through the corridor to the intensive care unit. Captain Reyes lay still, connected to monitoring equipment that beeped steadily. His right side showed subtle signs of paralysis, a common stroke after effect. In the next room, Jimenez was surrounded by even more equipment, an oxygen mask covering much of his face. She spoke softly to each man, knowing they probably couldn't hear her, but believing in the power of human connection even in unconsciousness. To Reyes, she promised to document everything for the investigation, to ensure nothing was overlooked. To Jimenez, she described the successful landing, assuring him that every passenger and crew member had survived. When she returned to the waiting room, she found it filled with transoceanic executives who had flown in from New York on a corporate jet. At the center stood CEO Maxwell Richards, an imposing figure in his tailored suit, his silver hair and commanding presence drawing all eyes in the room. "Miss Collins," he said, extending his hand, "I can't begin to express our gratitude for what you did." Sophia accepted his handshake with a firm grip that surprised him. I was just doing my job, Mr. Richards. Landing a commercial airliner with damaged systems and no formal training goes well beyond your job description. His voice carried genuine amazement. Our technical team says what you accomplished should have been impossible. With all due respect, sir, nothing is impossible with proper preparation and the right support. She nodded toward the transoceanic technical advisor who had guided her through the landing. Your team deserves as much credit as I do. Richard studied her with increasing interest. Modest, too. The media is already calling you the guardian angel of Flight 447. CNN, BBC, every major network is requesting interviews. Sophia felt a flash of discomfort. I'd prefer to focus on the investigation into what caused the emergency. 2 men are fighting for their lives because of a maintenance failure. That should be our priority. Richards exchanged glances with his PR director, clearly not expecting this response. Most people would be eager for recognition after such an extraordinary achievement. Of course, the investigation is our top concern as well. But the public will want to hear your story. My statement can wait until we have answers. Her voice was firm, but not confrontational. What's being done about the carbon monoxide leak? The technical director stepped forward. We've grounded all aircraft of the same model for immediate inspection. Preliminary findings suggest the environmental control system repair was improperly performed, allowing exhaust gases to enter the cockpit air supply under specific conditions. Sophia nodded, unsurprised. The exact conditions present during our flight. Yes, high altitude, specific power settings, and the particular angle of flight created a perfect storm of circumstances. Richards cleared his throat. Miss Collins, I understand your concern for the investigation, but there's something else we need to discuss. He gestured toward a private conference room. Could we speak alone for a moment? Inside the conference room, Richards closed the door and took a seat across from Sophia. For a moment, he simply observed her, this unassuming nurse who had accomplished the impossible. Our records show you've been with Transoceanic for 3 years. Exemplary service record. Multiple commendations for medical interventions. But nothing that suggested. He searched for the right words. Exceptional aviation aptitude. Sophia maintained steady eye contact. There was never a reason to mention my interest in aviation systems. Interest is one thing. What you demonstrated goes far beyond casual interest. Richards leaned forward. Your actions saved 237 lives, Ms. Collins, but they also raise questions. How does a flight nurse with no formal pilot training successfully land a damaged commercial aircraft? The moment Sophia had both dreaded and anticipated for years had arrived. She reached into her bag and removed a worn leather notebook, placing it carefully on the table between them. My father was Captain James Collins. He piloted Transoceanic Flight 219, which crashed in the Sierra Nevada mountains 20 years ago. Recognition dawned in Richard's eyes. The Donner Pass incident. Official cause was pilot error, if I recall correctly. That was the official finding, yes. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes hardened slightly. What the report failed to mention was that my father had submitted 17 separate maintenance concerns in the 3 months prior to the crash. All were deemed non-critical and scheduled for future attention. Richard's expression shifted from surprise to caution. I wasn't with the company then, but I'm familiar with the case. There was an extensive investigation, an investigation that conveniently overlooked evidence suggesting mechanical failure. Sophia opened the notebook, revealing meticulously documented observations, diagrams, and technical notes. After my father died, I dedicated myself to understanding what really happened. I studied aviation systems, aircraft design, maintenance procedures, everything I could access. And you joined Transoceanic too. What? Prove a conspiracy? There was no accusation in his voice, only genuine curiosity. I joined to prevent another tragedy. She turned several pages in the notebook. These are my observations from 3 years of flights. Patterns of maintenance oversights, procedural gaps, and systemic vulnerabilities, including environmental control system inspections that consistently failed to test for carbon monoxide leakage under variable conditions. Richards carefully examined the notebook, his expression growing more serious with each page. These observations are remarkably detailed and technically accurate. He looked up at her. Did you choose nursing as a cover for this investigation? Sophia shook her head. I became a nurse because I wanted to save lives. After burning out in emergency medicine, the flight nurse position offered a chance to continue helping people while also allowing me to pursue my other interest. Understanding what happened to your father. Understanding how to prevent it from happening to anyone else. She closed the notebook. What happened on Flight 447 wasn't a coincidence. Mr. Richards, it was the inevitable result of the same systemic problems that caused my father's crash. Prioritizing schedules over thorough maintenance, dismissing non-critical concerns, and failing to consider how multiple minor issues can combine to create catastrophic failures. Richards was silent for a long moment, weighing both her words and the implications for his company. Finally, he sighed. Miss Collins, if what you're saying is accurate, Transoceanic owes you more than gratitude. We owe you a complete re-examination of our safety protocols. That would be a start. What else do you want? Sophia met his gaze directly. I want to be part of the solution. Not as a whistleblower or media sensation, but as someone working from inside to implement real change. You're proposing we hire you in some safety oversight capacity? Richard seemed skeptical, but not dismissive. I'm proposing you create a new position, one that bridges the gap between medical safety and aviation safety. Someone who can identify the human factors and system interactions that most investigations miss. Richard studied her for a long moment. You realize this conversation could have gone very differently. Most executives would see you as a threat, someone who infiltrated their company with ulterior motives. I didn't infiltrate anything. I applied for a job I was qualified for and performed it excellently. She leaned forward slightly, while also gathering information that could save countless lives if properly implemented. A slight smile crossed Richard's face. You remind me of someone, my sister. Same unflinching directness. He stood, extending his hand. I can't make promises about a new position without board approval, but I can guarantee your observations will receive proper attention. In the meantime, there's the matter of what comes next for you personally. Sophia accepted his handshake with a questioning look. Meaning? Whether you like it or not, you're about to become very famous. Ms. Collins, the nurse who landed a commercial airliner, is a story that won't be contained. How we handle that narrative will affect both your future and Transoceanic's. For the first time since the emergency began, Sophia felt truly uncertain. She had never sought the spotlight, quite the opposite. Her entire career had been built around careful observation from the shadows. I need to think about that. Of course. But don't take too long. In the age of social media, stories like this develop their own momentum. Richards moved toward the door. We have a corporate apartment in Reykjavik you can use for now. Get some rest. We'll talk again tomorrow. After Richards left, Sophia remained in the conference room, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the emergency, the landing, and the hospital vigil was finally wearing off, leaving her mentally and physically drained. She made her way to the hotel arranged by Transoceanic, mechanically following the company representative through check-in procedures. The suite was luxurious, far beyond anything she would have chosen for herself, with panoramic views of Reykjavik's colorful buildings and the North Atlantic beyond. Alone at last, Sophia stood by the window watching fishing boats return to harbor, their work continuing regardless of her personal drama. The normality of the scene provided strange comfort. Life went on, even after extraordinary events. Her phone buzzed with incoming messages, colleagues from Transoceanic, media inquiries forwarded by company PR, and finally, a text from her Aunt Maria, the only family she had left. "Mia, you're all over the news. Are you really okay? Call me when you can." Sophia sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how completely her life had changed. The carefully constructed persona of the quiet, competent flight nurse who faded into the background had been shattered. There would be no going back to anonymity. She showered, changed into the clothes provided by the hotel, and finally called her aunt. "Dios mío, Sophia." Maria's voice cracked with emotion. "When I saw the news, I nearly had a heart attack myself. They're calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero, Tia. I just did what needed to be done. Just like your father would have said." Maria's voice softened. "He would be so proud, mi vida. So proud." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, the first she had allowed herself since the emergency began. "I keep thinking about him. About how everything I've learned since losing him somehow prepared me for this moment. Perhaps that was God's plan all along. To turn your tragedy into someone else's salvation." Sophia wasn't sure about divine plans, but she understood how loss could become purpose. After talking with her aunt for a few more minutes, she promised to call again soon and ended the call. Sleep came instantly, deep and dreamless, her body demanding recovery after the extreme stress. She woke 14 hours later to knocking at her door. Javier Morales stood in the hallway, looking rested and composed compared to when she'd last seen him in the cockpit. "Good morning, or rather, good evening. You've been asleep for quite a while." Sophia blinked, noticing the darkness beyond her windows. "What time is it?" "Just after 8 p.m. The crew is gathering for dinner downstairs. We hoped you might join us." She hesitated, suddenly aware of how her relationship with her colleagues had fundamentally changed. No longer would she be the quiet nurse in the corner. "Give me 15 minutes." In the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly when Sophia entered. Conversation hushed momentarily before erupting into applause. Crew members she had worked alongside for years looked at her with new eyes, respect, admiration, and curiosity replacing the polite indifference that had characterized their previous interactions. Lisa Chun, another flight attendant, pulled out a chair next to her. "We saved you a seat at the cool table," she joked. "Though I guess that's your table now." As Sophia settled in, the barrage began, questions about the landing, about how she remained so calm, about what it felt like to control such a massive aircraft. She answered patiently, downplaying her role and emphasizing the teamwork involved. "The real question," said Javier after the initial excitement calmed, "is what happens next for you. Word is Transoceanic wants to make you the face of their new safety campaign." Sophia sipped her water, considering her response. "Nothing's decided yet." "Oh, come on," Lisa pressed. "You could write your own ticket now. TV appearances, book deals. I heard CNN offered an exclusive interview." "I'm still processing everything," Sophia admitted. "Fame was never part of my plan." "What was your plan?" asked Javier, more perceptive than she'd given him credit for. "Because I've flown with you for 2 years, and suddenly I realize I don't know the first thing about you, except that you apparently understand aircraft systems better than some of our pilots." The table fell silent, everyone equally curious about the answer. Sophia realized this was an opportunity to start being honest, at least partially. "My father was a pilot," she began. "After he died in a crash, I became obsessed with understanding aviation systems. It was my way of maintaining a connection to him. This much was true, if incomplete. I never intended to use that knowledge. It was just something I carried with me." "Well, thank God you did," said Roberto, one of the other flight attendants. My wife and kids are grateful too. As dinner continued, Sophia found herself gradually relaxing into this new dynamic with her colleagues. They shared stories from previous flights, near misses that suddenly seemed more significant in light of recent events, and personal backgrounds that had never been discussed during their professional interactions. For the first time, Sophia felt herself becoming part of the crew's social fabric rather than remaining at its periphery. It was unfamiliar territory, but not entirely unwelcome. After dinner, as the group prepared to disperse, Lisa pulled her aside. A bunch of us are going to the hotel lounge for drinks. You should come. Sophia hesitated. I should probably review some notes for tomorrow's meeting with the executives. The notes can wait, Lisa insisted. You just performed a miracle. You're allowed to celebrate being alive. Something in the simple truth of that statement resonated with Sophia. For 3 years, she had been so focused on her mission, understanding the systemic failures that killed her father, that she had forgotten to live her own life. One drink, she conceded with a small smile. One drink became several as the evening progressed. Sophia found herself sharing more about her background, her childhood in Boston with a pilot father and teacher mother, her decision to pursue nursing after her father's death, and her gradual transition from emergency room work to flight nursing. What she didn't share was her suspicion about her father's crash or her methodical documentation of transoceanics safety procedures. Some truths were still too private, too potentially explosive to reveal in this setting. As the night wound down, Javier walked her back to her room. You know, he said thoughtfully, in all the chaos yesterday, I never properly thanked you for saving my life. For saving all our lives. Sophia shook her head. You don't need to thank me. Maybe not, but I need you to understand something. He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. What you did wasn't just skilled or brave. It was... I don't even have the words. People train their entire lives and still might not have pulled off what you did. It's okay to acknowledge how extraordinary that is. Sophia felt uncomfortable with such direct praise, but recognized the sincerity behind it. I had a lot of help. The ground crew, the flight controllers, you in the cockpit with me. Stop deflecting, Javier interrupted gently. Just once, accept that you did something remarkable. Looking into his earnest eyes, Sophia allowed herself a moment of acknowledgement. Okay, it was pretty incredible, wasn't it? Absolutely phenomenal, he agreed with a grin. And if you're smart, you'll leverage this moment into exactly what you want, whatever that is. As she entered her suite, Sophia pondered his words. What did she want? Justice for her father? Safety reforms at Transoceanic? Personal vindication? All of these, yes, but perhaps something more fundamental too. The opportunity to turn private knowledge into public action. To step out of the shadows and make a difference in a way she never could as the quiet nurse in the corner. She moved to the window, gazing out at the lights of Reykjavik, reflecting on the dark water of the harbor. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations with transoceanic executives, decisions about media engagement, and the beginning of a new chapter in her life. For tonight, she allowed herself to feel something unfamiliar, pride. Not just in the lives saved or the impossible landing accomplished, but in the journey that had brought her to this moment. The years of private study, the careful observations, the patient gathering of evidence, all had prepared her for 12 crucial minutes in the cockpit of Flight 447. Her father had always told her that preparation meets opportunity at the intersection of destiny. Tomorrow she would begin discovering exactly what that destiny entailed. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, Sophia Collins slept without the weight of unfinished business pressing on her heart. The morning sunlight streamed through the conference room windows at Transoceanic's temporary Icelandic headquarters. Sophia sat at the polished oak table surrounded by executives, Legal counsel, safety officers, and public relations specialists, all focused intently on her. The leather-bound notebook containing her 3 years of safety observations lay open between her and CEO Maxwell Richards. "These findings are troubling," Richards admitted, flipping through pages of meticulously documented maintenance discrepancies, procedural lapses, and potential safety hazards. "Some of these issues were already on our radar, but others—" He shook his head, clearly disturbed. Alexander Whitman, Transoceanic's chief safety officer, leaned forward. "Miss Collins, I've been with this company for 15 years. If systemic issues of this magnitude existed, I would know about them." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "With respect, Mr. Whitman, that's precisely the problem. The issues exist in the blind spots between departments, maintenance procedures that meet technical requirements, but create unforeseen risks when combined with operational realities. Like the environmental control system repair that introduced carbon monoxide into the cockpit only under specific flight conditions, which nearly killed 2 pilots and endangered 237 lives," Richards added quietly. Whitman's expression hardened. "And you believe these blind spots contributed to your father's crash 20 years ago?" "I know they did." Sophia's voice remained calm but carried absolute conviction. The official investigation blamed pilot error because they examined each component in isolation. They never considered how multiple minor issues could combine catastrophically under specific circumstances, exactly like what happened on Flight 447. The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. Richards exchanged glances with his executive team before turning back to Sophia. "Ms. Collins, I'd like to offer you a position within Transoceanic. Not as a flight nurse, but as a special advisor on integrated safety systems, reporting directly to me." Whitman began to protest, but Richards silenced him with a raised hand. "Your unique perspective bridges departments that normally operate independently. Your background in emergency medicine combined with your unconventional aviation knowledge gives you insights our traditional safety teams might miss." Richards leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to abandon your quest for answers about your father's crash. I'm offering you the resources and authority to transform that quest into systemic change." Sophia absorbed the offer, weighing it against her original plan. She had joined Transoceanic to gather evidence, to understand what happened to her father. She never expected to be invited into the inner circle, given an opportunity to implement reforms from within. "What exactly would this role entail?" she asked carefully. "Initially, a comprehensive review of our safety protocols, focusing on the intersections between maintenance, operations, and human factors." Richards gestured to her notebook. "Expanding on what you've already documented. Long term, you'd help develop new integrated safety frameworks that consider how seemingly minor issues might combine into major risks. And the investigation into my father's crash." Richards hesitated. "That's complicated. The legal implications of reopening a 20-year-old case are significant, I understand." Sophia closed her notebook deliberately. "But necessary if Transoceanic is serious about addressing systemic failures." The company's legal counsel, a stern-faced woman named Victoria Hardwick, interjected. "Publicly revisiting the Donner Pass incident could expose the company to substantial liability. And failing to learn from it exposed the company to 237 potential wrongful death claims yesterday." Sophia countered evenly. "Which risk would you prefer, Ms. Hardwick?" The room fell silent again. Richard studied Sophia with newfound respect. "You make a compelling point." He turned to Hardwick. "Victoria, explore our options for an internal review of the Donner Pass incident. Confidential for now, but thorough." Turning back to Sophia, he continued. "While that process begins, we have more immediate concerns. The media attention surrounding Flight 447 is unprecedented. Every network wants an exclusive with the nurse who landed the plane. Rebecca Winters, head of public relations, slid a folder across the table. We've prepared a media strategy that balances public interest with company messaging. Key points emphasize Transoceanic's commitment to safety, our exemplary training programs, and our forward-thinking approach to crisis management. Sophia scanned the document, noting how carefully it avoided mentioning the carbon monoxide leak or the maintenance failure that necessitated her extraordinary actions. This narrative omits the actual cause of the emergency. It focuses on the positive outcome, Winters corrected smoothly. Your heroic actions, our effective emergency protocols, the successful coordination with ground control. Half-truths that obscure serious safety failures, Sophia interrupted. I won't participate in whitewashing what happened. Tension filled the room as executives exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Richards broke the silence. What would you say, Ms. Collins, if given an unfiltered platform? The truth. That both pilots were incapacitated by carbon monoxide poisoning, resulting from an improperly performed maintenance procedure. That systemic gaps in our safety protocols allowed this to happen. And most importantly, that Transoceanic is committed to fundamental reforms to prevent similar incidents. She met his gaze directly. I would emphasize that last part, if it's actually true. Richard studied her for a long moment before turning to Winters. Revise the strategy. We acknowledge the maintenance failure, take responsibility, and announce a comprehensive safety review led by Ms. Collins. To Sophia, he added, transparency carries risks, but in this case, covering up the truth would be far more damaging. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing immediate actions, logistics for Sophia's new role, and arrangements for her eventual return to New York. As the room cleared, Richards asked her to stay behind. There's one more thing we need to discuss, he said once they were alone. The media narrative around you personally. The guardian angel of Flight 447 feet makes for compelling headlines, but it simplifies a complex reality. I have no interest in being celebrated as a hero, Sophia assured him. Perhaps not, but that's the story people want. The quiet nurse with a hidden talent for aviation who saves hundreds of lives through extraordinary skill and courage. He smiled slightly. It's not entirely inaccurate. It's incomplete, Sophia corrected. It ignores 20 years of preparation, 3 years of methodical observation, and the collective expertise of everyone who guided me through that landing. True, but people need symbols, Ms. Collins, stories that remind them that ordinary individuals can accomplish extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. Richards regarded her thoughtfully. You may not want the spotlight, but how you use it could determine whether meaningful change happens. Sophia considered his words. Throughout her life, she had preferred shadows to spotlights, background to foreground. But perhaps this moment required something different from her. I'll do the CNN interview, she decided. But on my terms. No sensationalism, no oversimplification. Just honest discussion about what happened and what needs to change. Richards nodded, satisfied. I believe that's the right choice. For what it's worth, I think your father would be proud of what you're doing. The mention of her father sent an unexpected wave of emotion through Sophia. I hope so, she said quietly. Everything I've done since his death has been trying to make sense of it, to find purpose in the loss. And have you? Found purpose? Sophia thought about the extraordinary events that had brought her to this moment, from the traumatized 12-year-old who lost her father to the woman who had just been offered the opportunity to transform an entire industry's approach to safety. I'm beginning to, she answered honestly. 3 days later, Sophia sat in a hotel suite in Reykjavik as makeup artists and production assistants prepared her for the CNN exclusive. The network had flown in Anderson Cooper himself for the interview, underscoring the global interest in her story. 5 minutes, Ms. Collins, a producer announced, adjusting a light stand. Sophia nodded, trying to quell the anxiety rising in her chest. Public speaking had never been her strength. She had deliberately chosen professions that allowed her to work effectively without drawing attention to herself. Javier appeared at the door, having appointed himself her unofficial moral support. "You look terrified," he observed with characteristic bluntness. "I'm a nurse, not a media personality," she replied. "What if I freeze? What if I say the wrong thing? Then they'll edit it out and ask the question again." He grinned. "That's the magic of television." His casual confidence helped settle her nerves. "Thanks for being here," she said sincerely. "You didn't have to come." "Are you kidding? Missing the television debut of the woman who landed our plane with no training? The crew would never forgive me." His expression softened. "Besides, you shouldn't have to face this circus alone." The producer returned. "We're ready for you, Ms. Collins." The interview set had been arranged in the hotel's presidential suite, with dramatic views of Reykjavik's harbor creating a stunning backdrop. Anderson Cooper rose as she entered, extending his hand warmly. "Ms. Collins, it's an honor to meet you. What you accomplished was truly extraordinary." "Thank you, but please call me Sophia." She shook his hand firmly, determined to present herself as composed and professional despite her inner tension. "Sophia, it is." He gestured to the arranged seating. "We'll keep this conversational. Just tell your story as honestly as you can." As cameras began recording, Cooper introduced her to the viewing audience with carefully crafted gravitas. 3 days ago, Transoceanic Flight 447 faced a catastrophic emergency when both pilots were incapacitated mid-flight over the Atlantic. What happened next defied all odds, as flight nurse Sophia Collins, with no formal pilot training, successfully landed the Boeing 777 with 237 souls aboard. Today, in her first exclusive interview, she shares the incredible story of courage, skill, and preparation that saved hundreds of lives. The questions began gently, establishing her background and experience as a flight nurse. Sophia responded with increasing confidence, finding that once she began speaking about her work, her nervousness receded. "Take us to the moment you realized both pilots were incapacitated," Cooper prompted. "What went through your mind?" Sophia considered her answer carefully. "Honestly, there wasn't time for fear or doubt. My emergency medical training took over, assess the situation, establish priorities, implement solutions. The first priority was stabilizing the aircraft, which meant I needed to take control. Without any flying experience? That's remarkable confidence." "It wasn't confidence so much as necessity," she corrected. "There was simply no alternative. Either I tried, or 237 people would die." Cooper leaned forward. "But sources tell us you've had a lifelong interest in aviation systems. That your father was a pilot." This was the moment Sophia had prepared for. The bridge from her personal story to the broader issues she wanted to address. "Yes, my father was Captain James Collins. He piloted Transoceanic Flight 219, which crashed in the Sierra Nevada mountains 20 years ago." She paused, allowing the significance to register. "After his death, I immersed myself in understanding aviation, flight systems, aircraft design, safety protocols. Not with any expectation of flying myself, but to comprehend what happened to him." "And this knowledge enabled you to land Flight 447? "Along with extraordinary guidance from ground controllers and transoceanic technical specialists. I didn't do it alone." Sophia shifted slightly, moving the conversation toward her agenda. "But what's more important than how I landed the plane is why I needed to. Both pilots were incapacitated by carbon monoxide poisoning from a maintenance error, Precisely the kind of systemic failure that has concerned me for years. Cooper recognized the pivot and followed her lead. You're suggesting there are deeper safety issues within commercial aviation? I'm stating it directly. Sophia's voice gained conviction. The incident on Flight 447 wasn't a freak occurrence. It was the result of interconnected failures that our current safety systems aren't designed to catch. Gaps between maintenance protocols, operational procedures, and human factors. Strong allegations. How has Transoceanic responded? With commendable transparency and commitment to change. This wasn't just diplomatic rhetoric. Richards had genuinely impressed her with his willingness to acknowledge problems rather than conceal them. They've asked me to lead a comprehensive safety review focusing specifically on these systemic gaps. Cooper raised his eyebrows. From flight nurse to safety consultant. That's quite a career shift. It's actually a natural extension of my medical background, Sophia explained. Healthcare has increasingly recognized that patient safety depends on understanding how systems interact, how medication protocols connect with staffing patterns, how communication procedures affect treatment outcomes. Aviation needs the same integrated approach. As the interview progressed, Sophia found herself speaking with increasing passion about her vision for transformed safety systems, not just at Transoceanic, but throughout the industry. She described how seemingly minor issues could combine to create catastrophic risks, how traditional department-based safety reviews often missed critical interactions, and how her dual perspective as both healthcare provider and aviation enthusiast gave her unique insights. When Cooper finally turned to more personal questions about her experience in the cockpit, Sophia described the extraordinary guidance she'd received from ground controllers, the crucial support from Javier as impromptu co-pilot, and the strange calm that had settled over her during the landing. "Were you afraid?" Cooper asked. Sophia considered the question. Not in the moment. There was too much to do, too many lives depending on complete focus. The fear came later, when I had time to process what had happened, what could have happened. "And how has this experience changed you?" The question caught her by surprise. She hadn't really considered how the events had transformed her personally, beyond the obvious career implications. "I've spent 20 years in the background," she began slowly, "observing systems, documenting patterns, preparing for something I couldn't name. I chose professions, emergency medicine, flight nursing, where I could make a difference without drawing attention to myself." She paused, formulating thoughts that were crystallizing even as she spoke them. "What's changed is that I've stepped out of the shadows. Not by choice initially, but now by decision. Because sometimes making meaningful change requires more than quiet observation. Sometimes it demands using your voice, claiming your space, and challenging established systems openly." Cooper nodded, recognizing the profound personal evolution she was describing. "And what would you say to people watching who might be facing their own moments of crisis? Perhaps not as dramatic as yours, but significant in their lives." "I would say that preparation meets opportunity at the intersection of courage." The phrase came naturally, echoing her father's wisdom, but transformed through her own experience. The most important preparation isn't technical knowledge, though that matters. It's the mental habit of breaking overwhelming challenges into manageable steps, of focusing on what you can control rather than what you can't. As the interview concluded, Cooper asked one final question. "What's next for Sophia Collins? Where do you see yourself a year from now?" Sophia smiled slightly. "Implementing safety reforms at Transoceanic. Developing training programs that bridge traditional departmental boundaries. And hopefully, bringing closure to a 20-year journey to understand my father's crash, not just for my sake, but to ensure the lessons from it help protect future lives." After the camera stopped recording, Cooper shook her hand warmly. "That was exceptional, Sophia. Your story will inspire millions." She thanked him sincerely, then found Javier waiting outside the suite. "Well?" she asked uncertainly. "Absolutely brilliant," he assured her. "Poised, articulate, and managed to transform a personal story into a compelling case for industry-wide reform. Not bad for someone who claims to hate public speaking." Relief washed over her. "I just kept focusing on why it matters, not the attention or recognition, but the opportunity to prevent future tragedies." That came through clearly. Javier offered his arm as they walked toward the elevator. "So, safety consultant to a major airline. Does this mean no more crawling around airplane cabins checking emergency equipment?" Sophia laughed. "Probably. Though I might miss parts of it." "The invisibility?" He guessed perceptively. "Maybe. There's comfort in working quietly, in making a difference without fanfare." "Well, those days are over," he said, not unkindly. "The world needs people willing to step into the spotlight when they have something important to say. And you definitely do." As they reached the lobby, Sophia's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed a number she didn't recognize with a Washington, D.C. area code. "This is Sophia Collins," she answered professionally. "Ms. Collins, this is Amanda Chun from the National Transportation Safety Board." The voice was crisp, authoritative. "I've been watching your interview with considerable interest. I'd like to discuss the possibility of you consulting on some of our ongoing investigations, particularly those involving potential systemic safety failures similar to what you've described." Sophia caught Javier's questioning look and mouthed, "NTSB," with widened eyes. "I'd be very interested in that conversation, Miss Chun," she replied, maintaining her composure despite the surge of excitement. "When would you like to meet?" "I'm flying to Reykjavik tomorrow. Could we arrange something for the afternoon?" After confirming details and ending the call, Sophia stood motionless for a moment, processing the implications. The NTSB, the federal agency responsible for investigating civil transportation accidents, wanted her expertise. The very organization that had attributed her father's crash to pilot error was now reaching out to her. "Good news?" Javier asked. "Potentially life-changing," she replied honestly. "A chance to influence safety standards at the national level." As they stepped outside into the crisp Icelandic air, Sophia felt an unfamiliar lightness. For 20 years, she had carried the weight of her father's memory, the burden of questions unanswered and justice unseated. That weight hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed from a burden into a foundation upon which she could build something meaningful. The quiet nurse who had moved invisibly through aircraft cabins was gone. In her place stood a woman prepared to use her unique perspective, hard-won knowledge, and unexpected moment of heroism to change an industry from within. She thought of her father's words, written on that photograph so many years ago, "For my little bird who will someday understand that safety isn't automatic. It's built by those who care enough to look twice." She had looked and observed and prepared. Now she would build, not just for his memory, but for the countless lives that depended on systems too often taken for granted. The path ahead would not be easy. Institutional resistance, bureaucratic inertia, and the inevitable backlash against change would challenge her at every turn. But Sophia Collins had landed a commercial airliner with no formal training and damaged hydraulic systems. After that, transforming an industry's approach to safety seemed merely difficult, not impossible. As the midnight sun cast its golden light across Reykjavik's harbor, Sophia felt ready for whatever came next. The extraordinary circumstances that had thrust her into the spotlight had also given her a platform she never sought but now embraced, not for fame or recognition, but for the opportunity to transform loss into legacy, observation into action, and near tragedy into lasting change. 1 year later, the New York skyline stretched out below Sophia's office window in Transoceanic's headquarters. The corner suite on the 42nd floor reflected her transformed status from the invisible nurse who once moved quietly through aircraft cabins, to the company's chief integration officer, a position created specifically for her unique blend of medical and aviation expertise. On her desk sat framed photos, one of her father beside his aircraft, another of Flight 447's crew taken at their reunion 6 months ago, and a third showing Sophia shaking hands with the FAA administrator after presenting her integrated safety framework to industry leaders. Beside these stood a small model of the aircraft she had landed in Iceland, a gift from the manufacturing company whose engineers still regarded her accomplishment with professional awe. The past year had unfolded like a whirlwind: CNN interviews, congressional testimony on aviation safety, consulting work with the NTSB, and most significantly, building Transoceanic's new integrated safety division from the ground up. The transformation from background observer to industry leader had not been without challenges, but Sophia had navigated them with the same methodical focus she'd applied in the cockpit during those 12 critical minutes. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Emily Chun, her executive assistant, appeared with a tablet in hand. The final report from the Donner Pass investigation team just came through, she announced, her expression carefully neutral. Sophia felt her heart quicken. After 20 years, the internal review of her father's crash that she'd negotiated as part of her employment agreement was complete. This wasn't an official NTSB reopening that would come later if warranted, but Transoceanic's own thorough re-examination of the incident using modern analytical methods and the systemic approach Sophia had championed. "Thank you, Emily. Hold my calls, please." Alone with the report, Sophia took a steadying breath before opening the document. The executive summary appeared first, 5 pages of technical language and engineering assessments that she skimmed quickly, searching for the conclusion. There it was, in clear, unambiguous text. After comprehensive review using contemporary analytical methods and systemic safety frameworks, this investigation concludes that Transoceanic Flight 219's crash was primarily caused by a cascading systems failure initiated by undetected damage to the aircraft's horizontal stabilizer control mechanism, exacerbated by subsequent environmental factors, including severe icing conditions. Previous attribution to pilot error is not supported by this analysis. Captain James Collins's actions, as reconstructed through flight data and newly applied computational modeling, indicate he followed appropriate emergency procedures given the information available to him at the time. Vindication. After 20 years of carrying her father's memory through a shadow of doubt, the truth had finally emerged. He hadn't made a fatal mistake. He had fought until the end against a complex mechanical failure that the technology and investigative methods of that era couldn't properly identify. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she continued reading the detailed analysis. The report confirmed her long-held suspicion that the 17 maintenance concerns her father had documented were indeed connected to the eventual catastrophic failure, not individually, but through complex interactions that the siloed approach to maintenance and safety oversight had failed to recognize. A soft knock interrupted her emotional moment. Maxwell Richards stood in the doorway, his expression somber but warm. "I thought you might want company when you read that," he said quietly. Sophia wiped her eyes, composing herself. "You knew what it would say?" "I received a preliminary version yesterday." Richards entered and took a seat across from her desk. "Your father was right, Sophia. And so were you. The system failed him, failed everyone on that flight. But his legacy, through you, is transforming that system for good. Does this change anything legally for the company?" she asked, her practical nature asserting itself even through her emotional response. Richards nodded, respecting her directness. "Yes, our legal team is preparing to contact the families of all passengers. There will be new settlements, public acknowledgement of the findings, and a formal apology." He leaned forward, But more importantly, the board has unanimously approved full funding for the Integrated Safety Initiative you've proposed, not just for transoceanic, but to develop industry-wide standards in partnership with the FAA. This was the larger victory, not just clearing her father's name, but creating lasting change that would prevent similar tragedies. The initiative would break down traditional silos between maintenance, operations, cabin crew, and flight crew, implementing cross-functional safety teams and advanced predictive modeling to identify potential cascading failures before they occurred. I never expected this outcome when I joined Transoceanic, Sophia admitted. I was looking for answers, not a career transformation. Sometimes our paths find us rather than the other way around, Richards observed. Speaking of which, there's someone here who'd like to talk with you. He's been waiting quite patiently in the conference room. Puzzled, Sophia followed Richards down the hallway to find Captain Eduardo Reyes sitting at the table. A year of rehabilitation had restored much of his function, though he still walked with a cane, a permanent reminder of the stroke that had nearly claimed his life at 38,000 feet. "Captain," Sophia greeted him warmly. "I wasn't expecting you today." Reyes smiled, rising carefully to his feet. "I wanted to deliver this news in person." He handed her an envelope bearing the FAA seal. "Your application for admission to the Special Accelerated Commercial Pilot Training Program has been approved." Sophia stared at the envelope in surprise. 3 months ago, after countless hours in Transoceanic's flight simulators helping design new emergency protocols, she had applied to the specialized program, created for individuals with exceptional aptitude but unconventional backgrounds. She hadn't told anyone at the company, uncertain whether this new direction made sense given her expanding role in safety administration. "How did you know?" she asked Reyes. "I was asked to provide a recommendation." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "I may have mentioned that you demonstrated remarkable natural ability when landing my aircraft." Richards looked between them, clearly surprised but quickly processing the implications. "Are you planning to leave us, Sophia?" She shook her head. "Not at all. The safety initiative remains my priority. But I've discovered that truly understanding the integrated systems requires experiencing them from every perspective, including the pilot's seat." She met his gaze directly. "The program would require 1 day per week for training. I believe it would enhance my effectiveness, not diminish it." Richards considered this briefly before nodding. "I agree. In fact, I think it adds credibility to our approach. The woman who landed Flight 447 now formally trained as a pilot while revolutionizing safety protocols. That's a powerful narrative." After discussing logistics and congratulating Sophia, both men left her to process the day's developments. Alone in her office again, she returned to the window, gazing out at the city below while reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From the traumatized 12-year-old who lost her father to the methodical nurse who documented safety concerns from the shadows. From the reluctant hero thrust into global spotlight to the change agent transforming an industry from within. Each version of herself had contributed to this moment of vindication and purpose. Her phone vibrated with an incoming message. Javier Morales, now more than a colleague but not quite defined as something else, had texted, "Heard the report came in today. How are you holding up?" Their relationship had evolved gradually over the past year, built on the unique bond forged during those 12 minutes in the cockpit and strengthened through the months that followed. As fellow members of the integrated safety team, they worked closely together, his practical operational experience complementing her systems perspective. "Vindicated, emotional, ready for what's next," she replied truthfully. Then added, "Dinner tonight." His response came immediately. "Absolutely. I've got news too." Flight instructor interview went well. Sophia smiled. Inspired by her example, Javier had begun pursuing his own path toward teaching the integrated approach to aviation safety. applying for a position at Transoceanic's training academy. Together, they were part of a growing movement within the industry, professionals determined to break down traditional barriers between specialties in favor of holistic understanding. A notification appeared on her computer screen, a reminder of her upcoming presentation to the International Air Transport Association's annual safety symposium. The title reflected her journey, from tragedy to transformation, building integrated safety systems for modern aviation. She would be the keynote speaker, addressing hundreds of industry leaders from around the world. The presentation would include the first public unveiling of Transoceanic's new Integrated Response Simulator, a revolutionary training platform that subjected cross-functional teams to complex, cascading emergency scenarios that crossed traditional departmental boundaries. Flight crew, cabin crew, maintenance personnel, and ground operations staff would train together, learning to recognize how seemingly minor issues in one area could affect others in unexpected ways. As she reviewed her notes, Sophia reflected on how completely her life had transformed in just 1 year. The quiet nurse who had preferred shadows to spotlights now regularly addressed international conferences. The solitary observer who had documented patterns in secret now led teams implementing system-wide reforms. The daughter seeking justice for her father had found not just vindication, but purpose that extended far beyond personal resolution. Yet for all the external changes, something essential remained consistent: her methodical approach to complex problems. Her belief that understanding interconnected systems was key to preventing failures, and her unwavering commitment to ensuring that no one else would lose a loved one to preventable tragedy. That evening, as Sophia and Javier celebrated their respective professional milestones over dinner at a small restaurant near Central Park, conversation turned to the future. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd never experienced that emergency," Javier mused. "You'd still be the quiet nurse doing secret safety observations. I'd still be the oblivious flight attendant, and all these changes might never have happened." Sophia considered this alternative timeline. The problems would still exist. The risks would still be there. The difference is whether they'd be addressed before or after another tragedy. "You always believed your father's crash wasn't his fault," Javier noted, even when the official reports said otherwise. "What gave you that certainty?" It was a question Sophia had rarely been asked directly. Most people focused on her heroic actions on Flight 447 rather than the 20-year journey that had prepared her for that moment. "I knew who he was," she said simply. "He was methodical, precise, constantly thinking about safety from every angle. The man described in the accident report, the pilot who supposedly made elementary errors, wasn't my father." "So you dedicated your life to proving it?" Sophia shook her head slightly. "Not exactly. I dedicated my life to understanding what really happened, which is different. The vindication is personally meaningful, but the system's understanding is what matters for the future." As their conversation continued, Sophia's phone buzzed with an email notification. Dr. Amanda Chun from the NTSB had sent the final draft of their collaborative paper on cross-disciplinary approaches to accident investigation. A paper that would fundamentally change how the agency approached complex system failures. "Good news?" Javier asked, noting her pleased expression. "Another piece falling into place," she confirmed. "The NTSB is formally adopting our integrated investigation framework for all major incidents going forward." "All because you refused to accept the easy answer 20 years ago," Javier observed. "And because you stepped up when disaster struck a year ago. One person really can change an entire industry." Sophia reflected on this observation. Not one person alone. It's about building connections between departments, between disciplines, between different ways of understanding the same system. 2 weeks later, Sophia stood at the podium before hundreds of aviation professionals at the IAT a symposium in Geneva. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the Transoceanic Integrated Safety Initiative logo, a circular design showing interconnected elements of aviation operations linked in a continuous feedback loop. 21 years ago, she began, Transoceanic Flight 219 crashed in the Sierra Nevada mountains. 17 lives were lost, including that of the captain, my father. The official investigation cited pilot error as the primary cause. The audience was utterly silent, captivated by the personal connection to industry history. 1 year ago, she continued, I found myself at the controls of Transoceanic Flight 447 over the Atlantic after both pilots were incapacitated by carbon monoxide poisoning resulting from a maintenance error. With extraordinary guidance from ground controllers and support from the cabin crew, we landed safely in Iceland with all 237 souls on board unharmed. She paused, allowing the contrast between these two incidents to register. These events, separated by 20 years, are connected by more than my presence. They represent the consequence of the same fundamental problem, our tendency to analyze aviation safety in isolated components rather than as an integrated system. For the next 40 minutes, Sophia presented the comprehensive framework that had emerged from her unique journey, from studying her father's crash through her years as an emergency nurse and flight attendant to her experience landing Flight 447 and her subsequent work transforming Transoceanic's approach to safety. She explained how traditional safety protocols treated mechanical systems, operational procedures, and human factors as separate domains, missing the critical interactions between them. She demonstrated, using actual case studies including her father's newly reanalyzed crash, how minor issues in multiple systems could combine to create catastrophic risks that no single domain approach would identify. Most importantly, she introduced the revolutionary Integrated Response Training Program that Transoceanic had developed, a program that was already being adopted by airlines around the world. The nurse who landed a plane isn't the story, she concluded. The story is how 20 years of careful observation, cross-disciplinary education, and willingness to challenge established systems prepared me for those 12 minutes in the cockpit. The story is how tragedy can become transformation when we refuse to accept simplified explanations and instead look for deeper patterns. As the audience rose in a standing ovation, Sophia felt a profound sense of completion. Her father's legacy had evolved from personal loss to industry-wide improvement. Her own unlikely journey from shadow to spotlight had created opportunities for meaningful change that would save countless lives. Later that evening, as she stood on her hotel balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, Sophia reflected on the words her father had written on that photograph so many years ago. For my little bird who will someday understand that safety isn't automatic, it's built by those who care enough to look twice. She had looked and observed and questioned. She had stepped forward when crisis demanded it. Now she was building something that would outlast her, a fundamental shift in how an entire industry approached the sacred responsibility of human safety. The quiet nurse who once moved invisibly through aircraft cabins had found her voice. The daughter seeking vindication had found purpose beyond personal resolution. The reluctant hero thrust into global spotlight had transformed momentary fame into lasting impact. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, implementing training protocols across cultural and organizational boundaries, continuing her own pilot certification, expanding the integrated approach beyond aviation into healthcare and other complex industries. But tonight, Sophia Collins stood at the intersection of past and future, honoring where she had come from while embracing where she was going. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with personal pain transformed into purpose. Sometimes the quietest observers become the most impactful leaders when circumstances reveal their unique vision. Sometimes preparation meets opportunity at the perfect moment. creating ripples of change that extend far beyond a single dramatic event. For Sophia Collins, landing Flight 447 had been just 12 minutes in a lifetime dedicated to understanding complex systems and preventing tragedy. But those 12 minutes had opened doors that 20 years of quiet preparation could not. The true miracle wasn't the landing itself, but the transformation it had made possible, from individual heroism to systemic reform, from momentary salvation to enduring safety. As she turned to go inside, Sophia thought of the thousands of passengers who would board flights tomorrow, unaware of how dramatically the systems protecting them were evolving. They would never know her name or her story. They would simply trust that someone, somewhere, had thought carefully about their safety, had looked not just once but twice, had considered not just individual components but integrated systems. That anonymity, that quiet impact without recognition, felt more meaningful than all the CNN interviews and international accolades combined. It reconnected her to the essence of who she had always been, not the celebrated hero, but the careful observer who noticed what others missed and acted when circumstances demanded. The truest legacy of Flight 447 wouldn't be remembered as the day a nurse landed a plane, but as the catalyst for a revolution in how humans designed, maintained, and operated complex systems with lives in the balance. For Sophia Collins, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything her father would have wished for his little bird, who had finally learned to soar. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.